This video is brought to you by Bitbox NES game cases. There is no better way to protect, store, and show off your NES game collection. Only available at stoneagegamer.com/bitbox. Skip it up and that up. So Sony is selling off their entire stake in Square Enix, a stake that I didn't even know they had. Shout out goes to YouTube user Dynamic Studios 1000. I'll have a link to his channel below in the description. So Sony is going to sell its entire stake in the Final Fantasy developer Square Enix. Sony announced today in a Japanese news release. Translated by the Wall Street Journal, the announcement states that Sony will unload its entire position, 9.52 million shares, in a transaction worth about 4.8 billion yen or $47 million. In the past year, and I've talked about a couple of these things before, Sony has announced that it will sell 2 major office buildings, lay off thousands of employees, and even sell its PC division, the VAIO division, as a means to return to profitability. Sony has held this stake in Square Enix since the early 2000s. The Wall Street Journal points out that Sony actually held 8.2% of Square Enix's total shares. Now, I know a lot of people are going to look at this as a terrible thing. People said the same thing when Sony sold off their VAIO division, which is their computer division, when they sold their office buildings, laying off employees, which, yeah, that one really sucks. But these are things they need to do to survive, because besides the PlayStation division, Sony isn't doing too well. And I'm happy to see, instead of them being full of pride and just holding all of these different divisions that aren't profitable, instead of selling them off or letting them go, they're actually doing what they need to do to make Sony as a conglomerate more efficient and survive. Because this is what it's about, man. It's not about, Sony like, oh yeah, we just want to be much more profitable. Yeah, they're going to make more profit by letting people go and selling off these divisions and selling off office buildings. But if they don't do these things, Sony will cease to exist. That's what you need to understand. It's not the 1980s anymore. It's not the 1990s where every single piece of electronics you bought was Sony. I mean, think about it. You bought Sony Walkmans, tape players. You bought Sony Discmans, Sony TVs. You bought, so you name it, you bought it Sony. You bought Sony boomboxes. Boomboxes are long dead. You bought Sony component stereo systems. You bought Sony stereo receivers. You bought Sony home theater systems. And there's just all of those markets, really, due to the advancements in technologies and the fact that everyone's using their damn cell phone for everything. Most of those markets are either completely dead or slowly dying because no one gives a shit about any of that technology anymore. So Sony has to evolve their business model. And by doing things like this, like letting go of Sony VAIO, which I think they should have done years ago, because honestly, I never really liked their computer line anyway. I mean, it's not that it was bad, it was just overpriced and pointless. Them doing these things is very good for Sony as a whole. You have to understand that, and they need to do this to evolve and survive in the current market. It's no longer the 1990s or 1980s or hell, even early 2000s anymore. It's a much different market, and Sony needs to do these things and cut the fat to be relevant in the future, or else Sony will cease to exist. Doesn't matter how good the PlayStation 4 is doing. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, make sure to rate, comment, favorite, and subscribe. And if you have an interesting news story you would like me to discuss, private message me with a link via YouTube. And if I use your news article, I will give you a shout out in the video and feature your YouTube channel in the description. Have a good one.